Hello and welcome to our webinar today, Building a College List. We're excited that you are joining us. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We do have a few fun activities while we wait for our fellow participants to join us. So the first activity that we are going to do is just a question that if you'll drop it in the chat. So Shannon, if you'll move to the next screen for me. We've got some housekeeping one to make you aware of. So obviously you're entering the webinar on mute. During the presentation, please feel free to use the chat to communicate directly with panelists or to answer questions for other attendees. And then if you have specific questions for the presenter, please put that in the Q&A section of the webinar and we'll address those either throughout the webinar or at the end. So welcome. Our first activity while we wait for the 10 o'clock hour, for those that have joined us, we wanted to ask you an introductory question if you'll drop the answer in the chat. When you think back on your own college application experience, did you have the right list and select the right college fit? Since we're talking about building a college list today, we wanted to see how your experience was. So if you'll drop that in the chat feature where you can do it to all panelists and attendees. We'd love to hear your feedback on this question. For those that are joining us, just know that you're on mute and we are having an activity for you to drop it in the chat, the answer to the question that you see on the screen. Just about your experience with your own college list when you were looking at college and your college fit selection. Welcome. We've got a activity. If you'll drop it in the chat, we wanted to get your guys' engagement early on in this webinar just to see what your experience was with your college list and college fit, since we'll be talking about how to help students build a college list. So looks like that one person said did not have the right college list, but did find the right college fit. So that's great. That's what we're going to talk about a lot today, how we advise students to ultimately find the right college fit and hopefully by building out that list. All right, Shannon, if you'll move to the next question. We've got one more intro question that we'd love for you guys to share with us. Just what's your confidence level for guiding the conversation with students to build their college list? Is it totally a new topic to you? You've heard of it before, but you could learn more, or you're familiar with this, but you want some updates? If you're joining us, if you'll drop this in the chat, we're trying to gauge as we talk through this topic of building a college list, how we can make sure we tailor the conversation to you. What's your confidence level with this conversation as far as the familiarity with helping students build a college list and finding a college fit? Awesome responses. Thanks so much for you guys engaging in these welcome activities. It helps us really maintain participation, but also allows us to open that dialogue and the presenters to be able to know where we're coming from. So great. We may have other activities throughout today that you can utilize the chat. So we'll move on to the next slide where we are going to just give you a brief welcome housekeeping. You're all on mute, as you can tell. So during the presentation, feel free to utilize that chat feature if you want to add to the dialogue. If you have specific questions for the presenter, please drop those in the Q&A. That way we can make sure that we address those and doesn't get lost in the chat dialogue. And we'll have time for questions, but feel free to drop them in throughout.
All right, good morning, everyone. On your screen, you will see our agenda for the day. So we will do a little bit of a short introduction, and then we will have our presenter to talk about the topic of building a college list. And as Kirsten said, afterwards, we will have time for a Q&A session, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about some of our upcoming webinars and, of course, give you our contact information. So, as you've already heard, we have two presenters today from Get to College. I'm Shannon Grimsley, and I'm the Outreach Program Director at Get to College. And then your other presenter and moderator is Kirsten Dufour, and she's the Assistant Director and Project Manager for Get to College. And both of us are housed out of the Jackson office, Get to College Center. So, sorry, I didn't mean to go that far. Sorry, let me go back where I was. All right, so welcome to the webinar. As I said, I'm Shannon Grimsley, the Director of State Outreach for the Woodward Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session and we'll send a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching the recording, today's date is August 11th, 2020, and the material in this webinar is current through the 2020-2021 school year. In today's session, Building a College List, you will hear about best practices to help your students build their college list, and we will also give you some resources and tools that you can pass along to the seniors at your high school as they begin the college search process. This webinar is targeted to any educator that helps students with their college planning, such as counselors, teachers, or graduation coaches. I will now share a little background and Get to College and a few logistics again about the webinar before we get started. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one in Jackson, one in Ocean Springs, and one in South Haven. We help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of college planning and financial aid. All of our services are free. In our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can tell students when to apply for admission and scholarship, help to fill out their FAFSA, or advise on essay writing and interviewing. In the fall semester, we are going to be offering all of these services, of course, in a virtual manner. This will include the counselor webinar series that you are participating in today and any other professional development opportunities, students and parent workshops, remote FAFSA completion, and our two-way text messaging. So all of those will be offered in a virtual format this fall. Remember again that during the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but you can ask us questions through the instant messenger at any time. Kirsten Dufour will be replying to the question and answer today, and we will have time at the end for live Q&A with the presenter. But feel free to message us questions at any time. So I would now like to introduce our featured speaker of the day, Catherine Box. Catherine Box grew up in Eastern North Carolina. Wanting to venture away for her college experience, she attended Sewanee, the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, where she studied American history and environmental science. As an undergraduate student, she worked in the Office of Admission as a tour guide and a senior interviewer, her first experience to the inner workings of college admissions. After several years of working outside of higher education, Catherine returned to her alma mater and served as a senior admission counselor for 4 years. She then moved to Jackson, Mississippi with her now husband and worked at Millsaps College for a few years, ultimately serving as director of admission. Catherine also, fortunately for us, spent 2 years with the Get to College Center as a college advisor, where she broadened her understanding of financial aid and grew in her passion for issues of access to higher education. After working more closely with families in a counseling role, Catherine accepted a position as Associate Director of Counseling at Woodbury Forest School, an all-boys boarding school in Virginia, where she worked with boys from various states and countries, diversifying her understanding of the national landscape of college admissions. Currently, Catherine acts as an Associate Director of Counseling at George School. George School is a combined boarding and day high school located in the greater Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. George School is an international baccalaureate school where students hail from over 30 states and 42 foreign countries. Catherine also remains very active in her professional spaces, a member of ACCIS, NACAC, PACAC, and SACAC, where she has served as the Chair of Inclusion, Access, and Success on the Board of Directors. She also currently serves as a committee reader for the Coke Scholars Program. Catherine and her husband, Jason, reside in the college town of Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, where Jason heads the Swarthmore College men's tennis team, ensuring that almost every conversation around their dinner table revolves around higher education. They sound like an exciting couple, right? Always talking about higher ed. They also, who she wants me to let you know, you may or may not hear them when the mailman comes today, because the mailman has not arrived yet, apparently, at her house. But they also have 2 Mississippi mutts, lovingly named Chunky for the Chunky River, and Millie after Millsaps College. So now I am going to turn this over to Catherine.
Thanks, Shannon. If you'll give me 1 second, I'm just making sure that I have, there we go, control of the slides. Thanks for that lovely intro. I'm really excited to be with you all today. As Shannon warned, we're all facing the nuances of working from home. Many of us are, and so I appreciate that some of you may have children running around or pets of your own. So thanks in advance for your grace with any distractions that may go on behind the scenes. I'm really, again, thrilled to be with you today, and excited to talk about a piece of our counseling work. I know it's one of many components of what you do. So I want you to know that today I acknowledge that this is just one slice of the pie for you in terms of your everyday responsibilities. I don't want to add to your workload. I'm hoping to guide some conversation today around best practices and tools that we can utilize to work smarter, not harder. And I just want to reiterate what Shannon and Kirsten mentioned, which is that you have the chat box today. So I don't know about you, but speaking of college, I think my favorite classes were ones that were a little bit more discussion oriented versus being lectured to. So if you have thoughts or opinions about anything that I'm sharing today, or if you have questions, please do plug those in so that we can drive some dialogue throughout today's conversation. I also just want to say that, beyond trying to make your life a little bit easier, I think that when it comes to building a college list, this is actually a major task that is easy to punt to the student. I think that throughout the college search, the college admission process, in a best case scenario, we're empowering students to take on as much of that as they can. Ultimately, it's the student who's going to college, certainly with your guidance and your expertise. So again, hopefully you'll pick up some tools today that will give you that foundation to then empower your students to take on a lot of this process for themselves. But we're going to be talking about some drivers of conversation. This is one of my favorite old quotes. It's been around for a while, that college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. And I have conflicting feelings about this at this point in my career. I think that this quote is not saying, students shouldn't shoot for the stars and aim for, being admitted or getting into the best possible college for them. But it's about, reminding us that when it comes to the college admission process, that it's more about best fit, as has already been mentioned today, about students finding the right match versus this concept of getting in or winning a prize. And so we're going to talk a lot about best fit today. We're going to talk about questions that you can pose to your students to help them reflect and consider how college is more of a match than this feat of getting in, which is, frankly, also exciting in and of itself. These are some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. What's in building a list? There's a lot involved in it, and we'll talk about everything from, where to start, and also how to really conduct a thoughtful conversation with students as they're exploring this notion of a list. But I want to start with some myth busting. So I hope that you will plug in some answers, please, into the chat box. I think that there's some misconceptions of when it comes to establishing a college list. And one of the first ones is, this is a myth, the number of schools on a list doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter how many schools are on a list. And I'd love for you to plug into the chat box. Do you think that this is true or false? Again, the number of schools on a list doesn't matter. Do you think that it's something that matters or it doesn't matter? And you can just plug that into the chat box. Great.
We're starting to get some responses, Catherine. Looks like we've got a few trues, some false.
Hey, I love that. And we'll, watch as some other answers roll in. But good news is that the answer, in my personal and professional opinion, is that it's true and false. The number of schools on a list matters in some ways, and in other ways it doesn't. One of the words you're going to hear me use more times than you probably like today is the word balance. My students roll their eyes at this point when I use the word balance, but I think balance in a list is arguably more important than the number of schools to which a student applies. And by balance, I mean our students applying to schools that are our best fit, that they know are a slam dunk in terms of affordability and admission and many other factors we're going to talk about today. On the flip side of that, there is such a thing as drowning in a list. I've had students who've applied to too many schools. I've had students who haven't applied to enough. But at the end of the day, the conversation I have with my students is that, come spring, when all the financial aid awards are on the table and the decision, admissions are in front of you, I want you to have the power to make that decision. I don't want that decision to be made for you. And so I think a balanced list ensures that, whatever is the highest priority for the student, it means that that student is empowered to make that decision at the end of the day. Thanks for your participation in that. Another, comment I'm curious, or another statement I'm curious about your take on is out-of-state schools are more expensive. In your opinion, in your experience, is that something that right away you think is true? Or is that something that in your experience is false? When you think of out-of-state options for your Mississippi students, do you think that they're more expensive or not? And is that something that you think about? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and dive into my, opinion on this. I think you're going to, as a quick teaser, get some great information about this down the line as part of this greater continuing ed series, this counselor webinar series hosted by Get to College. So I won't deep dive into this right now, but in some cases, yes, an out-of-state institution might be, but in some cases it's not. And so I wouldn't want you to go into this list building process with your students assuming that in every scenario it's not. The reason I'm bringing that up is in terms of the national landscape of college admissions right now, colleges and universities across the country are hungry for a diverse campus community, meaning they want students from different states, from different ethnic backgrounds, students who have different perspectives on politics and religion and all these different types of things. And so what's happening is an enormous amount of Mississippi students are not necessarily venturing out of state. And there are a lot of excellent institutions in state, so that's understandable. But just know that there may be college representatives, there may be colleges and universities who are going to be knocking down the doors of your students because they're very eager to attract students from the southeastern region. They want those voices, they want that presence on their campus. So they're going to be looking for qualified students who might, feel like they're adventurous enough to go someplace outside of Mississippi or even outside of the southeastern region. So I brought that up just so that you're keeping that in mind, maybe keeping an open mind as you think about college list. But again, I know that different priorities vary for students. So out of state is not always going to be the best option for some of your students, and I appreciate that. These are some of the factors that we're going to talk about today. There are many of them, and what I want to just say is that I think that when it comes to thinking about a college list with students, there are so many different scenarios in terms of when a student walks into your office. A student might say, I have no idea where to start, or I know for sure I want to be an astrophysicist and I want to go to MIT, or I think I want to study business and, play football at Jackson State. You're going to have students who come into your office knowing what they want. You're going to have students coming into your office, this is the most popular for me, who think they know what they want. And then you're going to have students who come to your office who have no idea. So I hope that in exploring the factors, you'll be able to give your students some tools to consider their search. You're already getting a little bit of some background. That's Chunky, who's supporting me in my presentation. So I want to first talk about size and just really note that it's beyond just small, medium, and large. And talking to your students, you may want to consider something beyond just talking about, how many students are on that campus. Size impacts the classroom experience, the class size. It impacts access to faculty members. It might have some bearing on internships or research opportunities. Something that I hear all the time when students come into my office is, I want to go big. I want to go to a really big school because I know that means that I will have more opportunities. I'm sorry, now my dogs are wrestling behind me, so sorry for that distraction. So some students may feel as though a larger school means more opportunities. I remember when I worked at a small college, it meant that I had some students who got handpicked for research opportunities or internships because the faculty members knew their names. And that was really exciting for those students. But I've also had students who've gone to smaller colleges and just felt like there was someone kind of breathing down their neck all the time. And they didn't like the idea that there was someone who always knew where they were and what their name was. So some students really enjoy that concept of anonymity. They might want to be someplace where they get to navigate their world all by themselves. And that's why I put a couple of notes up there about, student support and the development curve. Right now that there are some students who are going to be able to handle navigating a larger institution just fine. And that you're going to have some students who need a little bit more support. So being able to talk about those facets of the college experience when you're talking about size, I think is really helpful. When it comes to location, I often have students who say, I want to go study in a city. They are attracted to the bright lights of being in a city, or they want to go rural and they haven't thought about maybe what that means in terms of their college experience. When I was working at Get to College, I once visited a school in Maine called Bates College. It's a small private liberal arts college. And I had the great privilege of meeting with a faculty member there who actually was from Mississippi. And she told me the story of a student who received a full financial aid package at Bates College. He was really thriving. But when he arrived there, she noticed when he was walking around campus that he had on flip-flops and shorts. And I don't know if you know anything about the winters in Maine. If not, you might want to Google that. But this student had not thought, practically about what a Maine winter would entail. And that student also, frankly, didn't have the resources to buy, a robust winter coat and proper shoes. Fortunately, at Bates, they have a fund set aside for students. So they can go to LL Bean. LL Bean is headquartered in Maine. And they purchase them coats and layers and boots and those kinds of things to prepare them for the Maine winter. But she was sharing that with me as an example of, a student who really wanted to venture away and ultimately ended up thriving, but that there were maybe some obstacles, some factors that student had not considered. So, weather, cost of traveling, some of those pieces of really, venturing outside the backyard when it comes to higher education are important. Also on that rural, suburban, urban note, there may be some students who learn better experientially. Perhaps they really want to take internships while they're in college, or you might have students who just need to make some money. They need a job while they're in college, and maybe that college campus in a rural location doesn't have as many job opportunities, beyond on campus. And so some of those considerations can be really helpful as students imagine their life, imagine their college experience. I think that the financial piece of this conversation as a factor is arguably one of the most important. So I don't want to underestimate that importance at all. I have a picture of a money tree here. I think we'd all love it if we had one of those, a potted money tree in our homes right now. But I think that when it comes to finances, there is a little bit of a delicate dance when it comes to having those conversations with students, asking students the right questions, making sure that students are comfortable sharing what's going on and in their lives, in their family unit, and what level of importance financial viability is for them and affordability is in the search. So this is what I would say hands down. I don't know what your level of experience is with Get to College so far, but I would say I'll get to college first. I know that I'm biased, but I think when it comes to considering financial fit and helping families navigate that component of the college process, it's a really, really good place to both start and finish when it comes to the college search. So when in doubt, call Get to College, of course. But then I think it's important to figure out is the financial factor, is that the primary factor? Is that the lens through which the student is looking at college and universities? Is it only financial fit, or is it one of many components? I've worked with some families who have no resources and financial fit was absolutely, the highest priority, and I get that. And so in that situation, financial fit is going to be the driver of the search. But I've also worked with other families where it's a difference between what I call willingness and ability, where maybe there was some ability to pay for college, but that willingness wasn't there. So maybe there were some resources. In that case, maybe the student can incorporate other factors into the search beyond the financial factor. Maybe that student is able to kind of rank order other factors ahead of the financial component. But, I have students from a wide variety of socioeconomic backgrounds, so I completely respect the fact that this is going to be important. I think it's also important to think about whether or not the student might qualify for scholarships, really becoming familiar with the scholarship landscape in Mississippi and what's available at different institutions is going to help you determine best financial fit. Is this a high achieving student with a 0 EFC, or is this a student that doesn't have the top academic profile? That may impact what the students list looks like. And again, we've already talked about this, but are there jobs available in the area? And then I think in terms of course, ultimately helping that student craft a list according to financial fit, gaining some familiarity with the family's situation is really helpful. You may have policies or regulations at your school about that and about what's permitted in terms of conversation. But the more trust you can build early on with that student and the more transparent that student becomes, the easier it's going to be for you to support them in that. And I think one of the most helpful tools is the net price calculator. If you haven't heard of this before, every institution in the country is federally mandated to have a net price calculator on their financial aid website. The net price calculator allows families to plug in information about their assets, income, but also some academic information, and then it generates what the net price, what the cost may be for that institution. Some institutions have a more accurate net price calculator than others. Some schools might bury their net price calculator a little bit on their website. That might be a red flag for you because that means that they don't necessarily want students to use that net price calculator as much. But if you have families who are uncomfortable sharing with you their financial information and you know that financial fit is really important to them, then just kind of punting it to the net price calculator saying, hey, go to these websites, use this tool to start to get a feel for what you might have to pay for college. That can be a really helpful tool. So shifting gears a little bit, I think another factor that is definitely a driver, and particularly when I worked to Get to College, I heard this a lot, was major, right? Of course, like I want to look for a college that offers the major or the program that I'm looking for. So I'd love for you to just drop in the chat box. Was that the main factor for you? Were you looking at schools based on the major or the program that was offered? And if you'd like, you could also plug in, did you change your major? Did you, set your sights on a program or a major, go to college and, you followed it all the way through, or did you go to college and change your mind? And if you'll just plug that into the chat box, let me know what your experience was. Okay, great. We have one who said major didn't change, one added a major, one looked at schools based on major but changed major several times. Okay, great. Yeah, and that really reflects the spectrum of experience that I think students actually have. One of the things, though, that I think is a little bit dangerous sometimes, and dangerous might be too dramatic of a term, but I think is risky is probably a better word, is when a student only uses major or program as the only search factor in building a list or in searching for schools, because I think that many students change their minds. And I have Beyonce up there because I think a lot of our students are dreamers. They spend their lives dreaming about what they're gonna do, and that's a product of what they're seeing around them or what they're seeing on TV or what their parents are doing, or they wanna make some money, and that's great. But a lot of times students have much more of a windy path than a straightforward path when it comes to, you know, finding that perfect program. There are a lot of different statistics out there. Some are as low as, you know, 30 to 50%, but one of the most dramatic percentages I've seen in a study that's been in the last decade is that about 80% of students change their major in college. So what I would say then is, if you have a student who is first generation, or a student who, where you know that financial fit is important, and so graduating as quickly as possible and with a major that will help that student support themselves or maybe pay back any loans that they've taken out, then you need to help that student figure out what that path looks like, or you also need to support that student in considering what's a college or university where I could change my path and still graduate on time, or I could go to a college or university where there are a lot of resources to help me explore and discern what my career path might be or my major might be. But as always, this is going to seem like an infomercial. You know, I think make sure that you talk to someone to get to college. I think they do a great job of helping students consider majors, considering what an optimal career path might be. This is one of my favorite quick websites for students who come in and they just have those doe eyes and they're feeling really lost, and particularly when they're hearing from maybe parents or adults in their lives that they really need to know what they want to study. MyMajors.com offers a really quick quiz and asks some interesting questions that just starts generating some skill sets, generating maybe strengths, generates some majors that might be interesting for that student. And sometimes it just takes, you know, diving in, getting started, just starting to explore. I think students often kind of sit back and wait for it to happen to them. Like, you know, through osmosis, all of a sudden I'm just going to know that I'm going to be a doctor or I'm going to be a teacher. But the truth of the matter is they haven't been exposed, as you all well know, to many of the professions, to many of the majors even that are out there. So mymajors.com can be a quick, free way for students to get that process started. I also think that in this day and time, lots of colleges and universities are centering conversation about the value of their college or university experience and the strength of their majors and programs through the outcomes of their students. So if I were you, I would just send students to the college or university alumni or career website. So this is actually the alumni or career service website for Swarthmore College, which is just a little college town that I live in here in Pennsylvania. And they have a ton of information about college outcomes, job placement, grad school placement, that sort of thing. Colleges and universities who are doing it well typically want families to see that because they want students to invest in their institution. They want to attract students. They want to say, hey, your degree is going to be worth it. You're going to be able to get a job, or you're going to be able to get into a graduate program. So I think sometimes for students who are maybe more head versus heart people, and hopefully that resonates with you. I have students who are very, you know, data oriented and just want to know the facts. Looking at this data can really be helpful. You know, what's the X, Y, and Z that's going to get me where I want to be versus I have this feeling about this major or this program or this place, and that's why I want to go there. I think that more than ever, it just really takes kind of turning on the news, which some of you might be cringing when just even thinking about watching the news right now. There's so much going on in our world. But I think that this notion of belonging, being on a campus where you feel comfortable, where you feel happy, is really important to many students out there. And I think that it's a really high priority for many administrators on the campuses across our country right now as well. So I think a couple of things that could help your student consider campus culture or campus environment and how important that is in terms of the list of factors. One, I like to call it town and gown, the relationship between the college or university and the city. This is kind of a dramatic image, but that's Times Square. But because I live in the Philadelphia area, I have a lot of students who think that they want to go to school in New York City. And I say think, because I think that once they visit some of the campuses, some of them feel much more urban than others. Some have a more closed off campus, but sometimes they love that energy. They love that dynamic of being in a major city. But some realize very quickly that that's not quite what they want. And then the other image is actually of a town, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where UNC is. I'm from North Carolina, so I'm a big Tar Heel fan. So that was a selfish plug right there, but that's a quaint street that kind of runs through this very quintessential college town, Chapel Hill. That's Franklin Street. And it just kind of has a small town feel, but it's still in the Raleigh-Durham triangle area where there's a lot happening. So you've got kind of this small town college feel, but then a big, robust area where there are lots of internships and research going on. So the relationship between the college and the university and the town, I think, can really contribute to the vibe, can contribute to the students' feelings about campus culture. And I have a comment from someone, from Jennifer, thank you, that campus visits are important. I could not agree with that more. I think students being able to get on a campus and experience it and see what that campus is like in relationship to the town is hugely important. One reality, both in terms of resources and in terms of being in the middle of a pandemic, is that some campuses aren't hosting visits, or they're hosting them in a more limited capacity, or frankly, some families may not feel comfortable going on to a heavily populated college campus right now. That's just a reality of the world right now. And regardless of where you are with your comfort with that, or whether your families are, something really cool going on right now in higher education is a lot of colleges and universities around the country are taking all the resources, all the money, which is a pretty significant part of their budget that they normally use to send their admission staff off to travel around the country, even the world, or the money that they use to host those big, awesome, open house events every year. They're using a lot of those resources to build out their virtual visit platform. And you might be thinking, I'm so over virtual as you sit here and listen to me talk to you. You may have Zoom fatigue. It's a real thing. But for your students, it might be the difference between, getting on a campus and not. There are lots of campuses hosting virtual visits. There are also all kinds of virtual college fairs going on right now. And if you have some dreamers and you want to support, students, I mean dreamers as in students who are daydreaming about where they want to go to college, I think that it means that they could go visit, Ole Miss or Mississippi State in the morning, and then they could visit UCLA in the afternoon. So that's kind of exciting from an optimistic perspective. From a let's get real perspective, they're not getting to have that sort of tangible experience. They're not really getting to experience the campus in person. So I totally get that. It's not perfect, but it is an option, and colleges are devoting a lot of energy in that space right now. So I encourage you to, guide your students towards some of those virtual opportunities right now. So social culture is also a major driver. I think for some students, they have this idea in mind of what they thought college would be, that's informed by movies or TV shows or adults in their lives who've shared their experience. This is the Divine Nine. I just put that up there. Some students really care about Greek culture. They care about fraternity and sorority life. Some students don't care about that at all. They might, care more about, can I go to, a big basketball game or a football game, or is there ultimate frisbee, or am I going to be able to attend a performance and artistic and performance or participate in it. You know, each student is going to have their own priorities. So I think really getting students to think through that and list them, you know, when you imagine your college experience and experiences that you currently have in high school that you want to continue, or, you know, experiences that you've dreamt about, what does that look like? And then I put, if any of you recognize this image, this is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And this is meant to represent, you know, phoning a friend, you know, calling in a lifeline. When it comes to your students who are being recruited for athletics, or you have a student who plops down in your office and says, I'm going to apply to art schools. I've got to put together an art portfolio, or I'm going to be, you know, the next Oscar winner and I am applying to theater programs. Lean on your colleagues. You know, you probably have teachers at your school who have experience having either gone through this process or they've guided other students through this process, but do not try to take on all of that yourself. You know, phone a friend, use a lifeline, use the resources that you have around you. And that can often be really helpful. You can't be all things, you know, for all of your students. One of the very first words I used in this presentation was balance. I told you that you might get sick of hearing it. My students get sick of hearing it all the time. I think that oftentimes, you know, students have, like I mentioned before, they've maybe grown up with this idea of what they want, or they think they know what they want, or they don't know it all. But that notion of college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. So many students, particularly our high achieving students, are focused on the getting in part. Like they just want to get in, and what's the best place I can get in, or what do others around me perceive as the best place to get in. And that often can really muddy the process for students and shift around priorities in a way that creates an unpleasant outcome. And I've already said this, but I really want my students at the end of the day to be able to make a decision for themselves, to be able to have the power to have options when it comes to the college process, not have that decision made for them. So what I do in practice is think about the college list in thirds, essentially, in categories. And the first category is foundation or likely. And I think of that as a slam dunk. This could be an open enrollment institution. This could be community college. Mississippi has a really robust, strong community college system. So you might have a student who you know, okay, we're going to put some community colleges on the list for sure. We know that your family is going to be able to make that work financially, hopefully, and you're going to meet the course requirements. Your GPA far exceeds, you know, any requirements. You're going to get some scholarship money, whatever. But it also means that the student is actually willing to enroll. You'll notice that I'm not calling these safety schools, and you might think, okay, come on, we're being too PC here. Let's just call it what it is a safety school. I think that when we use the terminology safety school for students, that kind of undermines this notion of choice. And it also makes students feel like it's a lesser option. So I use the term foundation likely, and I really deliberately ask students, would you enroll here? If this is the only institution to which you're admitted, or if this cluster of schools, these are the only ones to which you're admitted, would you go there? Would you consider these schools? And in my opinion, honestly, there shouldn't be any schools on the list that a student is not even willing to attend. Otherwise, it's a waste of time in the application process. So the first category is foundation and likely, is slam dunk. And then we have, you know, target schools. So schools that, according to what you know, the student, you know, meets the requirements. Maybe if it's a private or a moderately selective institution, they have published middle 50% ranges, meaning, you know, there are 25% of students who score below, 25% of students who score above, but you know what this middle 50% range is in terms of test scores. They might also publish an average GPA range for students. Maybe the student's hopeful for scholarships, but you're not entirely sure that affordability is going to really be there. But ultimately, these target schools reflect the factors that you all have determined are most important for the student. The student has determined for themselves, frankly, is important to the student. And so these would be target schools. And I think that in the landscape of college admissions today, there are a lot of target schools out there because so much of college admissions is unpredictable. It's one of those professions where the only constant is change. And so there may be schools that used to be, a slam dunk that are now target schools. But I think having this middle of the road option, some of these options on the list is important. And I saw a comment that community colleges are necessary for some students. I completely agree. I think at my institution, I have students who are applying primarily to community colleges and trade schools, and they have a really clear path in mind of what they want to do, and that's a really affordable and comfortable and important option for those students. And then I have students who are reaching in a really different direction. So I just want to acknowledge that I really respect that and agree that that's very important. And then, for our dreamers, the ones who are sitting around and daydreaming about, some school that maybe they've heard of only on television, or someone said, you have to go to this place. But then you look at the admission statistics and see that, fewer than 25 to 30% of the students are admitted. That means that's a reach, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about your valedictorian. It doesn't matter if you're talking about the top student in your class. If the admit rate is somewhere below 25%, there's just not going to be a guarantee. And I just want to be really clear. This doesn't mean that you should discourage the student from applying to those places. There are a lot of studies and a lot of conversations going on right now in higher education about the importance of taking risks, the importance of, really not allowing students to just only play it safe. Like, it's important for them to dream a little bit and see what it's like, what could happen. There are plenty of students who have seen those dreams realized, and there are plenty of students who have experienced failure, and that's an important experience for them to have before they go to college, because more than likely they're going to experience failure on some level as a young adult. And it's better for them to be prepared for that now than to go off to college and never have experienced that at all. So you will know your student best and be able to determine what that reach looks like. But far and away, this is what a reach category might look like. And I also just want to be clear that these are different factors that could contribute to a school being a reach, target, or foundation or likely. It doesn't mean that all of these have to be in place for it to be in that category, right? It could be that it's the cost that makes it a reach, or it could be that it's the academic or selection criteria that make that school a reach. So this is how I help students build their list, is the rule of thirds. We started off this conversation thinking about, is there a right number? Is there a magic number on the list? I don't believe that there is a magic number. I think there is such a thing as too many schools. I think there is such a thing for some students as too few schools on the list. But far and away, what's so much more important to me is that student has balance, so that we know that the student has options. We know the student has an appropriate amount of stretch and reach, so that student doesn't feel as though their dreams are getting crushed, but that student still has a path forward, right? At the end of the day, we just want that student to be able to get to college. When it comes to talking about these different categories, I think that language really matters. I think that there are students all the time who have conversations with counselors, and counselors are just trying to keep it real, speak truth, and instead a student may walk away from the conversation feeling deflated, and may interpret the conversation completely differently. I've had that experience before. I've had a student who left a conversation thinking that I said, you can't get in or you won't get in, and that's not what I meant. But it doesn't really matter what I meant. It doesn't really matter what my intentions were. It matters how I made that student feel, and it matters, how I'm guiding that student through the process, through the language that I'm utilizing. So one of the terms that I've started using is universal reach. And these are a bunch of fancy schools that have really low admit rates. And you may have students who reach for the stars and are admitted to these schools. I mean, it happens every day all over the country. These schools are fully enrolled. So plenty of students are getting these opportunities, but these have some of the lowest admit rates in the country. And so sometimes if a student is reaching really, really high, and I want them to appreciate that it's a stretch, I talk about schools as universal reaches, meaning this isn't a reach because it's you. This isn't a reach because you aren't qualified. You may be qualified. That student may not be qualified. But regardless, this is a universal reach. This is a school that's a reach for every student in the country because they only admit 11% of their students or 5% of their students. So that might be a term that you can pull out when you're having a conversation with a student that, allows them to leave the conversation feeling like, okay, this is going to be tough. This is unlikely for me because it's such a reach for everyone, but I'm still going to put my best foot forward and submit that application. A couple other terms that are floating around in our profession that I think are important just to bear in mind in terms of conversations with students and in guiding them and building their list is undermatching and overreaching. So the most popular example I can think of in terms of undermatching or potential undermatch that could have gone very wrong is with our former First Lady, Michelle Obama. When her book, Becoming, came out and she went on a global book tour, one of the anecdotes from her book that got a lot of traction was this unfortunate exchange she had with her college counselor, her guidance counselor in high school. And Michelle Obama's brother, Craig, had been enrolled at Princeton, and she wanted to go to Princeton too. And she went in and talked to her counselor, and her counselor said, I just don't think you're Princeton material. And I think fortunately for the world, however you feel about politics or whatever, and if Michelle Obama had never even met Barack Obama, she was very successful in her own right. Like, she became a very successful contributor to society in terms of her job before she ever, got into politics. So how unfortunate it would have been if she had really listened to that counselor and not, put her best foot forward and applied to Princeton. She instead transformed that conversation into motivation, and it drove her, and she was admitted to Princeton. And so I think that's just a classic example. It's of course, a celebrity type of example, but I think that's always in the back of my mind. I don't want to be that counselor. I don't want to be that counselor that when a student walks away, they feel as though they aren't supported. They feel as though they can't shoot for that reach school. So that's why I think sometimes having some reach on the list can be important. Also, I encourage you to Google, there's a spoken word, a video called Dear White Counselor, and it's similar. It's about, a white counselor who's counseling a student of color and how that went very wrong in the college counseling process. So I'll let you check that out on your own time. The very opposite can happen, overreaching. This is kind of a famous meme that went viral, Chrissy Teigen, in her emotional face. I think this was actually a happy moment, but when a student overreaches, it's not such a happy moment. I had a student last year who did not listen to any of my guidance, did not apply the rule of thirds despite much conversation and advice, and she applied to 20 schools and was only admitted to one. So she put in hours and hours and hours and money, not to mention money. There's cost associated with some of these applications and time, and she ended up with one option. So that's another cautionary tale of how this lack of balance can go wrong, either when you're talking about undermatching or overreaching. So just want to reiterate that, your words matter. The more neutral kind of terminology you can use, the better. Trying to make your students feel supportive while still having truthful and honest conversations with them. I think that can be really important. And I try to remember building the college list in terms of the 3 R's. I want my students to rank the factors that are most important to them. This doesn't mean college rankings. Those can actually be a little bit dangerous to use too much in the college process, in my opinion, but ranking. So rank what's important to you. We just talked about lots of factors. you know, finances, location, major, campus culture, all kinds of things. So what's most important to you? And let that be, you know, let that ground your search. Let that be the foundation for your search. And then do the research. I'm going to show you all a couple of resources that I think will be helpful. That's another R, resources, that will maybe help your students and help you in terms of searching for schools according to factors that are important to you. And then reflection, and that might be too fluffy for you, and I'm sorry if it is. Reflection is a really big part of my school culture, and we really want students to not just get into college, which is obviously very important. We want that student to be able to you know, change the cycle in their family if they're first generation. We want that student to be able to accomplish all of their goals. But we also want students to learn something about themselves through the college process. For many of them, this is kind of the first big adult process that they're going through. And it's kind of a channel to adulthood, right? They're going from high school to college, and we sort of think of that as the beginning of their adulthood, or we hope that it is. And so I want students to rank the factors that are most important to them, then do the research, and then really take some time to think about what's important and trust your instincts. I mentioned earlier the head and the heart. I'm a true believer in the balance of the two, you know, using facts, using information to make an informed decision and to craft that list, but also, you know, trust your instincts in the process. I just want to close with a few quick resources. If you haven't heard of Big Future, it's one of my favorites. And I should mention, all of these resources are linked on the Get to College website, but Big Future is great. You can see along that panel several filters. It's cut off a little bit, but a student could plug in a location, they could plug in affordability, they could plug in something like diversity. They want, you know, representation on campus in a particular way, or they want to play baseball on campus, all kinds of things, and then search accordingly. You can also create an individual account on Big Future. It's actually operated by College Board. So if you have a student who's taken an SAT, I know that ACT is pretty dominant in Mississippi, but if you have a student who's taken the SAT for some reason, or if they have a College Board account, they can save colleges in a college list and sort of begin to capture and shape their interest in that way. The U.S. Department of Education College Scorecard is also awesome. You can see right here, it has Mississippi College pulled up. I just pulled up one, but you can actually collect several schools and compare them to one another and really look at hard data and comparing one school to another in terms of things like cost, graduation rate, and that sort of thing. And then Get to College has an awesome resource too that's in very plain sight and accessible on their website, College Snapshots. And you know, you can plug in any school in Mississippi and really look again at important data like test scores, cost of attendance, graduation rates, and those sorts of things that will really particularly equip your students who are thinking about financial fit, I think, in the process. And so that's all I have. I know that was a lot, and I appreciate your attention, but I'd love to open it up for questions. You know, what questions or opinions or comments do you have according to the conversation that we've covered so far?
Catherine, it looks like we had some good dialogue in the chat throughout your presentation. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, but we have definitely appreciated your commentary that you've provided us and guidance. I know I definitely was taking a lot of notes along there to share out with those in attendance. So if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A section. We've got a lot of appreciation for you, Catherine. It looks like the information that you presented today was very helpful. Numerous people have commented on that. So thank you so much. Any parting advice that you have for those in attendance today?
I would just want to say thank you right back, of course, for everything that you do. And again, appreciating that this is just one part of all of what you do. I hope that this information, again, just establishes a foundation, but I really challenge you to punt this task back onto your students. Now you have some tools and you have hopefully some new information to share and guiding your students, but don't feel as though you have to take on this college list crafting or building all by yourself. Really try to empower your students to take it on, as they will be the ones, ultimately making that decision and going to college.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. For all of you out there listening, I have a senior as well, so I was taking copious notes. They have been laughing at me for quite a while because I've been doing this work for 20 some odd years, and now my child is there, and now I'm having the panics. So thank you again, Catherine. I know that lots of your information was very relevant to me and what I'm going through. So just to let you guys know, we will email you the recording for this webinar in the next couple of days. We will also post it on our YouTube channel. So feel free to share with any of your colleagues or anyone that you might, any of your students, anyone you think might find this presentation useful, just as we did. We will also send you a link to a brief online survey if you have time. I know everybody's sick of surveys as well, as much as they are Zoom, but it just helps us if you fill it out, giving us some feedback. Since this is the first of our webinars in this series, it will just help us keep improving. So, as we said, today was the first of our webinars. So we are deeming these as Topic Tuesdays. And so it'll be every Tuesday, not every Tuesday, but the dates that you see here, but it will be on a Tuesday, always at 10 o'clock. And our next one will be next week, Tuesday, August the 18th. And that webinar will feature speakers from many of the honors colleges in Mississippi. So we're excited to hear from them. So we will continue this webinar series throughout the fall semester. If you participate in at least 5 of these webinars, you will have the opportunity to apply with us for 0.5 CEUs. If you attend all 10, then you would get 1 full CEU. So that's exciting news. So we are going to give you all the opportunity to do that. So you see that we have a lot of different topics that are being covered in the next couple of weeks: college applications, updates from the Mississippi Office of Student Financial Aid, scholarship procedures from all 8 of our IHL schools. We're going to talk about some counseling cultural competencies, selective college admission, college recommendation letters, and of course, get to college's favorite topic, federal financial aid and the FAFSA. I know y'all can't wait. I know we can't wait. So again, you can register for these webinars on our Get to College website. They are listed under the Educator tab, and then choose Professional Development. While you're there registering, as always, please check out all of our other resources for you and your students that are listed under that Educator tab. There's a lot there, even some games and some other opportunities, and especially if your school is incorporating a career readiness course, there are a lot of opportunities and resources there for you. As always, if you, oh, sorry, here's some other, I'd forgotten about these, some ACT instructor trainings that are happening in September and October. So if you have teachers in your school who teach ACT prep class, ACT instructor training will happen in September and October. All of those opportunities on the are on the website. Also, again, FAFSA training. I know many of you have probably been through the FAFSA training, but Kirsten and I can't wait to get started on FAFSA training. It's our favorite time of year. And then we're also going to be having some college and career readiness teacher chats on the dates that are listed there. So again, everything's on our website. If you have questions, always just let us know about that. So, as always, if you have any questions, here are our numbers for our South Haven, Jackson, and Gulf Coast office. You can, we are doing everything at this point, and we will update you if it changes, but we are still not back in our office, so we're doing all appointments virtually. And then we will be in the high schools virtually as well, as I mentioned earlier. So here is all of our contact information. Also, here is Catherine's contact information if you would like to contact her. I know she misses Mississippi greatly, so I know she would love to hear from any of us fellow Mississippians. Again, thank you for joining us, and remember, we will post this link. And so look forward to that arriving in your inbox soon. Thank you so much. And we will see you again next Tuesday for Honors Colleges in Mississippi.